to do it, okay? So it'll be the same format essentially, right? But remember, there's a cumulative effort. We're gonna have a review session next Wednesday. So we're gonna have substantive lectures for the next 3, and then a review session next Wednesday, because you do not have labs the following Friday unless, your fellow deems that, they will be available for you. That's up to them. They got stuff to do too. I did want to show you guys this Instagram post from Thanksgiving that my husband made, but my computer doesn't like Instagram, so I'm going to show you here. So I want to show you guys, see this turkey? Can you see it? See the turkey? It's nice looking, right? It's a good looking turkey. My husband actually made 2 turkeys. There, it's bright again. 2 turkeys. That was the plan because so many people were coming. And so this was the day before. There it is. He's sliced it. He's put it on a bed of lettuce to wrap up and put into the refrigerator. It's good, right? Oh! And he's dropped it in the floor. So this was his reaction. Oh no, you can't see it, sorry. This is his reaction. Which made for a very difficult Wednesday, right? Okay, so I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Turkey has a lot of tryptophan in it. What does that mean? Makes you sleepy. It also kind of messes with your memory a little bit, right? So be aware of that, right? So you have a couple weeks to recover before finals from all of that turkey overload, unless your mom and dad sent you packages of turkey back, which mine always did. So we're going to talk about social welfare policy today. We're going to talk about economic policy on Wednesday. Next Monday, the fellows and I are going to talk about what policy we think is most important, okay? And a lot of that will bring in your opportunity to talk about your policies as well. And then on Wednesday, we're going to have a final exam review, okay? So the final exam is when again? Wednesday the 15th. It'll open at midnight. It'll be open till midnight. You'll have the finals amount of time to do it, okay? So I think that's a little over 2 hours, like 2.5 hours or something like that, all right? It's got a cumulative element. Okay, let's talk about social welfare policy. First thing I want you to know about is taxation, okay? That's the very first question that I posted up there in the questions too. There are 4 different kinds of taxes, or there are actually really 3 different kinds of taxes, and then we'll talk about tax credit. The 3 different kinds are progressive, proportional, and regressive. Progressive, proportional, and regressive. A progressive tax means that people with higher incomes pay a higher proportion of their income, right? So if I make $10,000 a year, I pay 1% of my income. If I make $20,000, I pay 2%. If I make 25, I pay 3%. If I make 30, I pay 4%. If I make 35, I pay 5%, etc. That's progressive, right? Okay? And so the idea is, with a progressive tax, is that the less money you have, the less disposable income you have, and so it's harder for you to pay that tax. So it lightens the burden. If I am making, $5 million a year, or say $15 million a year, right? And I lose 30% of that, right? I'm making 15 and I lose 30% of that, I'm still making $10 million a year. Do I have enough money to get by? Theoretically, I think I can do it, right, on $10 million. If I'm making $5 million a year, and 30% is taxed, right? Then how much am I making? How much am I taking home? About 3.2, right in there, okay? So about 3.2 million. Am I making enough to get by? Can I put food on the table and heat the house? Yeah. If I'm making $1 million a year, right, and I'm paying 30% in taxes, how much am I taking home? $700,000 a year. Can I get by? Yeah, right? I'll tell you that I can get by on 700. If you guys want to pay me, that's cool, right? You can get by on $700,000 a year. At a certain point, right, that starts getting more difficult, right? At 30%. And so think about what that is. Where is that point? What do you guys think? 200,000? 100,000? And so that progressive tax is going to be for the higher income. And understand that our median income in the United States, we'll get to that in a second, is about $46,000 a year for a family of 4. Okay? And so think about it that way. That's the median income. That's what the middle income is. Okay? Half the people make less than that. The other half make more. A proportional tax, all people pay the same share of their income. Everybody pays 20%. I make $10,000, I take home $8,000. I make $20,000, I take home $16,000. Is it harder to get by appreciably? Is there a big difference between $8,000 and $10,000? Yeah, I think you could argue that, right? Or $18,000 and $20,000? Sure. Is there a big difference between $80,000 and $100,000? Not really, right? And so at a certain point, right, it gets to where that progressive becomes really difficult on one, or that proportional is more difficult to bear at one end. A regressive tax is the opposite of a progressive tax. In other words, it taxes those who make less income more than those who make more income. So let's talk about examples of this. Our income tax structure is a progressive tax structure. It's not as progressive as it once was, right? Up until the early 1960s, if you were in the top 10%, then you were paying half your income in taxes. Okay? That gets lowered to about 40% in the 1960s. 45, I think. No, 40. And then in the 1980s, it gets lowered even further, so it's more like 32%. Okay? It gets lowered further at the beginning of the 2000s, and it got a bigger cut in 2017. Okay? And so it is still progressive, but that has flattened out. It was more like this. It's now more like this. Does that make sense? The curve? This, right? That's income tax is typically progressive. Proportional tax, all people pay the same amount. Now, an example of this would just be that if on your income tax, everybody paid the same amount, all right? Everybody paid 10%, or it would have to be more like 25% to make it work, okay? So that means that if you make 10,000, you take home 7,500. Okay? A regressive tax is the opposite of progressive tax. The best example of this is sales tax. Now, sales tax seems like a flat tax or a proportional tax, but it's not. Why not? Because the less money you make, the more of your income you have to spend in order to live, okay? So let me give you an example. If I'm making $25,000 a year, $25,000 a year, and I'm taking home about, 20 of that because of my income tax burden, okay? What am I spending my money on every month? Tell me. What's the very first thing I'm spending my money on? Rent. Rent is taxed. And this is significant. Because mortgages give you money back, okay? But if you're only making $25,000 a year, you're not going to qualify for a bank loan. And so you're going to pay rent, and it is taxed. What else? What else? Huh? Car payment, absolutely. Your car's taxed pretty heavily, a luxury tax, right? If you can afford a car at $25,000, you're going to pay a significant tax on that. What? Power, electricity, utilities generally, right? Keeping the heat on or the cool on, keeping the water on, okay? What else? Gas for your car, that's taxed. What else? Come on, you guys. Groceries, right? Food, you gotta live. So how much of that money do you have left at the end of the month? Are you putting away any to save? No. You're spending every dime, and every dime that you're spending is taxed, okay? And so, if that's the case, the more you make, the more you put away. So for example, I work at the University of Oklahoma, and I have a couple of savings plans. I have my teacher's retirement. I put 7% of my income into teacher's retirement. I have a 401k. I put another 3% of that. I should put more, but I don't make that much money. But that means that 10% off the top I'm saving. That's not taxed. Okay? And it's going to draw interest. As long as I don't pull it out early, there's no tax on that. Okay? So I'm taking home an income now, and currently my husband and I have 4 children because we're foster parents. But it is likely that, in January we won't anymore. So it'll be just the 2 of us again. And when it's just the 2 of us, that money plus his income, and he's putting away 10% too, is going to sustain us. We're going to be able to do what? First of all, pay our mortgage because we made enough money to be able to apply for a loan to get a loan on our house, right? And then when we file our taxes, we're going to get all the money we spent on interest back. Not only are we not paying taxes on our mortgage, but any interest that we paid on our mortgage, we get it back. That's a pretty good deal. Okay? An earned income tax credit is a little bit different because understand what I'm talking about, that mortgage exemption, that's middle class, upper middle class, billionaires take out these sort of loans because it's a good way to not pay taxes and get something back. Okay? The people who can't take advantage of it are people at the lower income levels because they're not qualifying. An earned income tax credit is a negative income tax that provides income to very poor working people. You have to be working, and it has to be, you have to have 3 or more children, and you have to be making under $15,000 a year. So think about that. Think about that. That's saying, we recognize that it's impossible for you to feed your children without this. But that is also going to be taxed when they go spend that money, because what's going to happen? They're going to buy things they need, right? So that regressive tax is going to kick back in. The United States, compared to the OECD, do you guys know what the OECD is? Basically, it's the most developed countries in the world, okay? So, and this is, these are the people that were like, hey, we're talking about trade with you, and we're going to talk about it on even footing, okay? And so, Belgium, 54%, Germany, 49.4%, Sweden, 42%. The OECD average, because there's more above that, is about 36%. The United States is 5% below that at 31.7%. When you hear people saying we are overtaxed, right, that US tax rates are incredibly high, A, that's not true historically in the United States. Okay, our tax rates are an all-time low. And number two, it is not correct as compared to the rest of the world. Okay? Now, there are people that tax less than us. Australia, slightly less, 28.6. Korea, 22. Mexico, 20%. New Zealand, 17.9. And Chile, 7, right? Now, also in undeveloped or developing countries, right, then tax rates are much, much lower, okay? So this is the OECD average. So we're gonna also see, I put Sweden up, Sweden and Germany and Belgium are up there, but basically you can put all of Europe above that line, okay? You can put Japan above that line. Most taxpayers are in the 15% tax bracket or below, okay? So when we talk about what taxes we pay, tax bracket, the highest, 39.6%, right? That's 892,000 people, 35%, 176,000 people. Almost 2 million pay 33% or a third. About 4.5 million pay 28%. And then about 24 million pay 25%. But look at 15% or below. 42 million, 27 million, 36 million. That tells you that that median line is over here, between this 10 and 15%. Okay? Most taxpayers fall into that bracket. Most taxpayers are going to fall into that bracket. If we're talking about how much people make, most people are going to fall into that bracket. The median line is going to be between that 15% and 10%. Social welfare policies, and I want to be clear about this, are policies that provide benefits to individuals. Okay? So, education is one of those. How is education something that provides a benefit to an individual? It increases their earning potential, okay? Got something? Well, the main thing is it's yours, right? What you choose to take out of this class, what you chose to leave high school with, right? This is your benefit. Nobody else can take that away. Your degree, right? It's not transferable to someone else. Okay? We also have poverty programs. People who are living in poverty provides benefits. Social Security, people who are older, over the age of 65, and have put money into the Social Security system throughout their lives. My dad's best friend owned a jewelry store in Pryor, Oklahoma, cultural center of the universe. And he was very angry whenever he retired from his jewelry store, and having never, because he was self-employed, never choosing to pay into Social Security, he had nothing. And he hadn't put away for retirement. And he said things like, well, all these freeloaders on Social Security, I should be getting some of that. But he never put money in. One of the reasons why Social Security is so very popular is because people say, I paid in, and now I'm going to get out. Okay? Healthcare, Medicaid, and Medicare. Medicare is for the elderly. Again, we pay into that out of your income taxes, right? Or out of your paycheck often. You're going to pay into that. Medicaid, on the other hand, and any sort of support from the federal government for children, right? Those sort of programs, those are aimed at the poor, people who cannot afford to pay for health care. The largest social welfare policies are Social Security and Medicare. They take up the biggest part of our budget every year. And that's for people 65 or older. But listen, they've paid into it. There's supposed to be money there that they can take out. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. 90% of Americans approve. If you want to get rid of Social Security, you can't do it with the popular will. FDR said this is an indestructible program. It cannot be taken away, and he's absolutely right. The majority of social welfare recipients are not poor. I receive social welfare in a tax break, right? My mortgage, that's an individual benefit, okay? I received, how many of you have student loans? That is what? Social welfare, because the government's paying your interest, okay? That's a social welfare program and you're benefiting from it. How many of you get Pell Grants? A few? Social welfare. Okay? Some of these are income-based, but for example, in particular, student loans aren't. All you have to do is be enrolled and you get it. I went to college, or actually I went to law school with a guy who had plenty of money to pay for law school. His dad paid for it, right? But he took out the maximum federally insured loans that he could during law school. This is the 1990s. He put them in the stock market. And whenever he graduated from law school, he pulled all his money out. He paid off his loans in full. And he had about $50,000 to start his practice. Because it's not income-based. Okay? Anybody qualifies. 5/6 of all money goes to entitlement programs, and entitlement programs mean this. You benefit regardless of income and wealth. Okay? An entitlement program is guaranteed student loans. An entitlement program is Social Security and Medicare. An entitlement program is veterans benefits, right? You could be a millionaire, but you can still go to school on the VA program. You can still get the benefit. For example, my husband was a Marine, right? And so that means that we got the benefit of a mortgage rate that is, I don't know, half that of my mother's. Because it's federally subsidized. 5/6 of all money in social welfare goes to people because they qualify for it. They are enrolled in college. They served in the military. They are over the age of 65. It does not go to the poor. So, why is social welfare controversial? One thing is the word welfare, right? It's been in many ways sort of demonized, so be careful of language. Entitlement programs are government benefits that certain qualified individuals are entitled to regardless of need, whereas means-tested programs are those programs only available to individuals below a poverty line, and that moves. So for example, children below a poverty line is higher to get them health care, okay? So the poverty line is higher for their parents than it is for their parents. So a lot of times children will get qualified for health care and their parents will not, okay? Why? Why would we do that? Why would this be something that people would be behind? Because people do support this program. This is one of the few sort of programs that you see support for. There's a means-tested program. Why do people support that program? Because they're children, right? They can't work. And a lot of times, remember that we say, hey, you should be working, right? You shouldn't depend on the government. And we blame that, but we can't do that with children, right? They're children, okay?
can bring back child labor.
Huh?
We can bring back child labor.
We can, it's absolutely true. Eric would do it. He says small fingers, right? All right, means testing gets 15% of the total budget, 45% of total budget goes to entitlements. This is how we spend our money. Defense and Homeland Security is this yellow, Social Security is this orange, health is 28%, that's going to include both means tested and also some an entitlement, mainly Medicare. But veterans, 4%, transportation, 4%, food and agriculture, 4%, education, 3%, international affairs, 2%, housing, 1%, energy, 1%, science, 1%, labor, 1%. Everything else, every other, remember you looked at the bureaucracy and saw all those different agencies there are, 9% of our budget goes there. Education policy is mostly entitlement, okay? It's a subset of legislation which provides standards for course material. It mandates the days spent in school, right? It mandates how many days you have to be in school. It provides some funding. It requires adequate yearly progress to get that funding. And it grades districts on their performance. Okay? There is both state and federal level policy control. The reason why there is federal level policy control is because the money comes from where? The federal government. States also pay, but states require the federal government to give them money to pay for education because they do not allot enough out of their budgets to do that. They depend on it. There's higher ed policy and there's common ed policy. So this would fall under higher ed policy, whereas what falls under common ed policy? Pre-K through 12, okay? We have 4 major education policies over time. National Defense Education Act of 1958. It was aimed primarily at the idea that we were losing the space race. We needed more scientists, and that would be good for our national defense. So more math and science. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 said, yeah, but we also need, some ethics, things like that. Some more well-rounded. Not everybody does math and science particularly well. Let's increase that. We still want math and science to be part of that core, but let's talk about other things too. The No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. Now, you guys are mostly too young to have any memory of this, okay? But No Child Left Behind comes from policies that a state was using. Remember I talked about federalism, right? So Texas was using this policy that basically they said, we're going to use standardized testing. We're going to see what benchmarks they hit at each of these grades. If they fall below it, then the first year we're going to help them with some funding. If they fall below it for 3 years, we're going to take all funding away. So what you see happen in Texas is it looks like it's working. It looks like scores are going up. It looks like this focus is really working. George W. Bush is governor of Texas at the time. He becomes president of the United States, and he says, I've got this great new education plan. Democrats and Republicans are both like, yeah, it looks good. Let's implement it. And so they did. But they did not provide a lot of federal funding for the testing. The testing became teaching to the test rather than teaching, okay? And then it turns out that a lot of Texas school districts were cooking the books because they needed the money, because they could not let their funding disappear. And so they were hiding transfers, they were hiding kids who were failing, all of that sort of stuff. And so whenever it didn't work at a national level, people were like, why? It worked so well in Texas, and they started looking closer, and it didn't. And a lot of this had to do with specifically this, okay? And I want you guys, how many of you are education majors? or want to be teachers? 1, 2, only 2, 3, okay, 4. Still kind of low, normally more than that, okay? One of the key things that we know is this. Teaching to the test means that people learn how to memorize, but they don't learn how to think, okay? Kids learn how to memorize, but they don't learn how to think. And so this means that whenever they're presented with more complex problems, they don't know how to solve it because they don't have a memorized answer for it, okay? Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015 was meant to remedy some of the problems with No Child Left Behind. Basically, it says states can put into effect whatever they want as long as it is a standard that they're using, and as long as we see progress and we get annual reports, we'll give you money. Okay? So states get a lot of power to do what they want to do, but states flounder a bit. And so education is different from state to state. Something I want you to know about income and wealth is that they're two different things. Income is the amount of money collected between any 2 points in time, all right? We can do this, right? Every week, you make this amount of money. Every month, you make this amount of money. Every year, you make this amount of money. Income, right? Since you guys can totally look at my income and everybody else's income on OK Policy?
Okay, policy hasn't.
OK Policy has it. You will see that I make $52,000 a year. You say, you have a law degree and a PhD, that seems low. Shockingly, right? Okay. So $52,000 a year. What that means is that I take home, after I put away things into my 10%, right? And taxes come out, and I pay some extra for a little extra insurances, like for my eyes, stuff like that, right? I take home about $2,900 a month, okay? That's my income. That's my income. And so what I do with that income is, pay the mortgage, pay the car payment, et cetera, okay? Wealth is the total amount of assets owned, including stocks, bonds, bank accounts, cars, real estate, all that sort of stuff. And so my wealth is different. It's negative, just so you know. But, I can say, hey, look, I have these assets and I have this debt, right, that is associated with these assets. And this is my total wealth. So, for example, we can say that my wealth includes things like my Grateful Dead teddy bear, right? It's definitely mine. We can say it's I think, $28 in a savings account that I have, right? It's my wealth. I have some other wealth too. I have a house, I have a pool, I owe a lot of money on it, right? I have a couple of cars, I owe money on one of them, okay? But all together, that's my wealth. And you can take it apart, you can value it, you can put it together against my debt, and you'll find that, like I said, I'm negative. But nonetheless, that's what it is, okay? So let's say my total wealth is about $10,000. That would be an exaggerated amount, all right? But let's say that's what it is. One of the keys to a successful democratic process is a large middle class. Remember we talked about this when we talked about democracy? Why is that necessary for democracy? What is it specifically about the middle class that makes democracy work? They have enough money that they have a little time. But they don't have so much money that they don't recognize the struggle, okay? So they have a little time, so they participate, but they're still concerned about things because they don't have enough money to separate themselves from that, okay? A middle class works because of economic reasons to make democracy work. The more your middle class shrinks, The bigger the gap between the rich and poor, the less democracy works. Let's think about poverty in perspective. Bill Gates owns an amount equal to that owned by the poorest 40% of the country. One person who's been divorced, this is after his divorce, and Melinda took half. Okay, so before, I think they owned as much as 70%. Okay? Actually, not quite that much because it increases, so more like 55%. But 40% of the country, 50.4%, listen to me, 50.4% of all working Americans dip below the poverty line for at least a year in their working life. I am not talking about people who are lazing about and not working. I'm saying the working people half dip below the poverty line for at least a year in their life. During 2020, of course, that number has risen. 2021, we started recovering that, okay? But I want this to be noted here. The reason why people drop below the poverty line is this: divorce, a death in the family, prolonged illness, okay? These are the things most likely, or a massive layoff. These are the things that lead to people dropping below the poverty line. And if you'll notice, none of these are really in their control. These are life events. Only 10% of means-tested aid recipients use aid for more than 5 years in their lifetime. 10% use it for more than 5 years. 13.9% of Americans live below the 2018 poverty line of $25,000 for a family of 4. That's not the median, that's the poverty line. It's $12,000 for a single person. In 2020, there was actually some relief for those people because of government checks that we got. You guys remember those checks? You know, there's actually some relief there. Low income and poor are 43.5% of the population. Think about that, because 43.5% is how many people live in the lower income and poverty region in the United States. We're not talking about 12% who won't get off their dead ass, right? That's what your uncle said at Thanksgiving, okay? That's not what we're talking about. 40% of Americans. Only 20% of those below the poverty line receive assistance. Okay? Only 20% of those who live below the poverty line receive assistance. This is our poverty rate between 1959 and 2015. We have a really high one in 1960. We have a lot of civil rights programs that go into effect here in the 1960s and bring down the poverty rate among African Americans. But our official poverty line, right through here, has been hovering between 10 and 15%. You see it goes down in the 1990s. Economy going gangbusters. Actually, just so you know, taxes on the wealthy went up a little bit. Okay, lowest period right here in the 1970s. Our attitudes on poverty are essentially this: government should help, but the poor people are not trying hard enough. They're not trying hard enough. 2 jobs, that's not enough. You should get a better job. You should move somewhere else. People should take personal responsibility for themselves. And this also intersects with race. Whites' attitudes about poverty are influenced by their view of non-whites. If they believe that more people are on welfare that are African American, that are Latino, then they're less likely to think that there should be benefits. The media portrays 3/4 of welfare recipients as African American, and in fact, about 1/5 of recipients. It's still higher than the proportion in the population, but again, that has to do with structural racism over time. If we look at poverty rates by race and Hispanic origin from 1959 to 2015, if you'll see, non-Hispanic white never really gets above 10%. Asian, pretty close, okay, but just a bit above. But Black and Hispanic, over 20% throughout this entire history. Twice as likely to live in poverty. Twice as likely. In 2019, these are the poverty rates. Native Americans, 26.2% living in poverty. Latinos, 22%. African Americans, 21.6%. Asian Americans, 14.7%. Non-Hispanic whites, 9.9%. 51%, oh, let's take attendance real quick. Attendance, 51% of K through 12 children, and listen to me, these are children who, even though Eric would like to put them to work in the mills, cannot work, and more than half of them live in poverty. There's some opposing views, okay? It's the last question there. The culture, one view is that there is a culture of poverty. That negative attitudes and values toward work, family, success condemn people to the lower levels of accomplishment. This idea that this is a cycle, it's generational, it's difficult to get out of. The poor are present-oriented, lack self-control, exhibit poor work habits, lack positive aspirations, and have weak family structures and relationships. It's the idea of a culture of poverty. The opposing view is that there are hostile environments. Racial discrimination, social and cultural customs, and educational limits are a part of this. The primary link to disparity in income is educational attainment. Because you are in college, you are going to make more money statistically than your friends who did not go to college. Period. When you graduate, you're going to do better than those who only had a couple of semesters. Statistically, you're going to do better. People are poor because of external barriers to their success. Now, there was a study in which we followed, or this social scientist followed a group of families across 12 years. They were poor, they were middle class, they were wealthy, and it was about 100 different families. And what he found was that there was no discernible difference in attitudes, in work ethic, across these three groups. This is how the American population really is. Most of us are working. A big chunk of us are retired, right? Some of us are in school. We have a chunk that are disabled or are homemakers. And then we have this little bit down here, teal, looking for work, and orange, not looking for work. More work does not mean less poverty. The United States has more people in the workforce who work longer hours and has more poverty than every other industrialized country. Unemployment insurance is an entitlement. We work longer hours. Social Security is an entitlement. The question is, how do we pay for Social Security when we drain the trust fund and use it to pay for, Vietnam and things like that? Medicare, Medicaid, and Veterans Benefits and the Affordable Care Act are 30% of the budget. So, which one do you prefer? Quick poll and you can go. Old age protections. I've lost my phone. Old age